By 2019, Rolando Antuain Williamson, aged 33, had become the crime boss of Birmingham, Alabama, and the leader of a multi-million-dollar drug trafficking ring. Williamson ostentatiously displayed his wealth on social media by posting photos with stacks of cash and jewelry, including a custom-made diamond and gold pendant with his initials RAW. He also owned a fleet of expensive vehicles, including Cadillac Escalades and an $80,000 Dodge Charger Hellcat. Williamson, who was known as Baldhead, rose to power through his connections with the Mexican Gulf Cartel. In 2019, one of his cartel associates invited him to solidify their working relationship by riding motorcycles together in Monterrey, Mexico. Williamson met with another Mexican contact on June the 11th of 2019, who told him the trip could potentially be a trap that would have seen him kidnapped, tortured, and held for ransom. Williamson heeded the warning and cancelled the trip, but continued trafficking copious quantities of cartel drugs in the months that followed. Unbeknownst to him, the same man who'd warned him about potential dangers across the border would bring about the dismantling of his operation. At the time of their meeting, the unnamed Mexican contact was a cooperating witness for law enforcement and was wearing a wire. Among other incriminating statements, he'd recorded Williamson talking about prospective customers in the Birmingham area saying, "I promise we can make a lot of money. I'll buy the dope and we just sell it to them." Some of Williamson's other drug runners in Alabama had also started talking to the authorities, and an FBI task force gradually gathered enough evidence to move in for the arrest. In the late summer of 2019, as Williamson was preparing to travel to Atlanta and pick up a cartel shipment, he was taken into custody by the FBI. His home was raided along with 2 other properties. From Williamson's arrest alone, the authorities seized 135 grams of heroin and 150 grams of fentanyl, 109 grams of cocaine, 573 grams of pure methamphetamine, 52 kilos of marijuana, over $97,000 in cash, multiple firearms, and over 1,700 rounds of ammunition. By mid-November, 17 of his criminal associates were indicted for their various roles in the drug enterprise. Williamson opted to go to trial and was convicted under the federal Kingpin statute. He was found guilty of leading a multi-million-dollar continuing criminal enterprise and of numerous drug charges. He was sentenced to life in prison plus 120 months. Number 6. Ronald Roland. In the summer of 2024, a Brazilian drug lord was arrested in the southeastern city of Guarujá. Following a 2-year manhunt, 50-year-old Ronald Roland had ties to Mexican cartels, and over a period of 5 years, he was suspected to have laundered roughly $900 million in drug money. He used over 100 shell companies and businesses to do so, including a biking shop owned by his wife, Andretza de Lima. The shop often received deposits exceeding $30,000 in a single day. De Lima frequently posted on social media content related to her and Roland's luxurious lifestyle and trips to various destinations including Colombia, Dubai, France, and the Maldives. The authorities were able to track Roland down in 2024 after his wife had posted a photo that featured a distinct landmark in Guarujá. The federal police raided Roland's coastal condominium as he, his wife, and their daughter were sleeping. The Kingpin was among 8 people arrested during an operation that stretched across 7 states. From Roland, the authorities seized 34 cars, a boat, a private jet, weapons, and large amounts of cash. He'd been investigated for his underworld ties since 2012 when he worked as an airline pilot. The U.S. Drug Enforcement Administration agency had identified him as a suspect in a group of pilots involved in large-scale cocaine smuggling. Roland's most recent arrest wasn't the first time that social media played a part in his downfall. In July of 2019, he was taken into custody after his ex-wife posted a photo on Instagram with the location of a Sao Paulo restaurant where they were having lunch. A mugshot taken at the time suggested that Roland had undergone plastic surgery, presumably in a bid to hinder the efforts of those pursuing him Number 5. Jonathan Parkhill. A British drug baron who'd come to be known as the Escobar of Essex, was jailed for 16 years in the spring of 2023 after admitting conspiracy to import cocaine and multiple other offenses. 55-year-old Jonathan Parkhill was among hundreds of criminals who were arrested after the UK's National Crime Agency launched Operation Venetic, aimed at taking down the encrypted communication platform EncroChat. By 2020, Parkhill and his right-hand man, Kevin Hanley, were moving massive quantities of cocaine, which were reportedly supplied by their Colombian contacts. In 2020, Parkhill blundered a deal involving 30 kilograms of cocaine by mistakenly sending them to South Africa when they were supposed to arrive in Germany. The drugs were seized and Parkhill was detected by law enforcement when he went on EncroChat to try and rectify his mistake. In another of their multi-million-pound deals, Parkhill and Hanley tried to smuggle roughly 0.5 metric ton of cocaine into Belgium. The proceeds from that shipment were meant to be split between them and Colombian groups, but that deal also fell through in the end. Parkhill was arrested at Heathrow Airport upon returning from Colombia in 2021. At the time, he was described as one of the biggest drug traffickers caught in the UK for a long time. Hanley was also arrested at his home in Uxbridge, West London, whereupon officers found him in possession of a sawn-off shotgun. He admitted the same offences as Parkhill and was handed an 11.5-year prison sentence. Number 4. Gianfranco Torres-Navarro. In the summer of 2024, the U.S. Immigration and Customs Enforcement Agency announced that a Peruvian crime boss was arrested in Endicott, New York. 38-year-old Gianfranco Torres-Navarro had entered the U.S. illegally through the U.S.-Mexico border in May. He was released and given a notice to appear for immigration proceedings, but then in July, ICE learned from the authorities in Peru that Torres-Navarro was a wanted man. The country's justice system had ordered his immediate capture, and ICE consequently arrested him alongside his girlfriend, Michelle Sol Ivana Ortiz Ubius. According to Peruvian media, Torres-Navarro was the leader of a criminal organization called Los Killers de Ventanilla y Callao. Its primary source of income was extorting construction companies, and its members resorted to ruthless violence to control the business and deter rivals. Torres-Navarro was wanted for 23 killings in Peru, an aspect reflected in his nickname, Gianfranco 23. According to local media, he had the names of his victims tattooed on his body. He fled the country after the killing of retired police officer Cesar Quail Herrera at a restaurant in San Miguel. In June, 6 reputed members of Los Killers were arrested following a series of raids, and they were accused of homicide, contract killing, and extortion. Ortiz Ubius was described as instrumental in the running of the gang. In addition to being Torres-Navarro's romantic partner, she was also his lieutenant and cashier. The 30-year-old had a sizable TikTok following, and she often posted about her lifestyle, which involved wearing designer outfits, going on exotic holidays, or shooting targets at a gun range. As of the latest updates on the case, the couple were detained in the US and awaiting deportation. Number 3. Tokiro Rodas. MS-13 kingpin Tokiro Rodas, also known as El Perverso, was among several of the gang's leaders to be named in a multiple-count indictment released by the U.S. District Court for the District of Columbia in November of 2011. Prosecutors said that Rodas was involved in racketeering activities that included murder, distribution of drugs, extortion, robberies, and obstruction of justice. The criminal activity took place in Washington, D.C., Virginia, Maryland, and other states. Rodas, an El Salvador native, resided in the Washington area and was in frequent contact with fellow MS-13 leaders from his home country, with whom he coordinated various illegal operations. After he was indicted, the kingpin went on the run, and the U.S. issued 2 extradition warnings. In March of 2022, more than a decade since he'd been indicted, Rodas was tracked down in Honduras. The muscle-bound 41-year-old was arrested by officers equipped in riot gear as he was playing in a recreation league soccer match. Rodas was still wearing his team uniform when Honduran authorities held a video-recorded press conference To announce his capture, he was handcuffed, his feet were shackled, and he was surrounded by law enforcement officers, some of whom were equipped with assault rifles. MS-13 was notorious worldwide for its brand of extreme violence, operating under the motto kill, abuse, and control. To protect themselves from MS-13 retaliation, those from the group that had apprehended Rodas wore masks or balaclavas, and some even turned their backs to the camera. The high-profile arrest occurred at a time when El Salvador was struck by a wave of deadly violence. From March the 25th to 27th of 2022, at least 87 gang-related killings were reported. MS-13 and Barrio 18 were the gangs holding the most authority within the country. President Nayib Bukele declared a state of emergency, curtailing civil liberties and expanding the police's powers. In late March, Bukele threatened to start punishing the 16,000 imprisoned gang members if their affiliates on the outside didn't put an end to the violence. The president said, "Stop killing now or they are going to pay for it." Bukele's crackdown led to the homicide rate plummeting drastically, simultaneously resulted in El Salvador having the highest incarceration rate in the world. Today's topic was requested by Jaime Ramirez 1834 and Jared 504 Smith Sr. If you have any other topics you'd like to learn about, subscribe and let us know in the comments section below. Number 2. Paul Wallace. In April of 2022, a boss of bosses within the Los Angeles-based Crips gang was sentenced to 35 years in federal prison. 56-year-old Paul Lil Doc Wallace had been imprisoned since 2020 following a racketeering indictment describing him as the most influential member of the East Coast Crips. He'd been affiliated with the gang since he was 6 years old and gradually rose through the ranks. Wallace became involved in all matters of crime but suffered the violent consequences of his lifestyle on more than one occasion. When he was in his mid-teens, he was shot 7 times and survived only to be shot again shortly thereafter. In his rise to Crips leadership, he was imprisoned multiple times. He was handed his first firearms conviction at the age of 19 and was later convicted of involuntary manslaughter in connection to a 1989 drive-by shooting. Wallace ultimately achieved triple OG and big homie status, which reportedly enabled him to order or commit violence with impunity. In the most recent indictment, he was accused of actively participating in 2 murders, the 2014 shooting of 50-year-old Reginald Brown and the 2003 shooting of Raymond Pickett. Wallace was reported to have handed an AK-47 rifle to an unidentified triggerman in the first incident. The weapon was subsequently found in Wallace's van. The kingpin was believed to have personally handled the killing of Pickett, a fellow East Coast Crip. Because he'd publicly disrespected him, Wallace would only be convicted in connection to Brown's death, but the murders were brought forward by prosecutors as special allegations for the overarching racketeering conspiracy. Wallace's supporters and lawyers maintained that he was reformed and had renounced violence. A major argument in that regard was the fact that he'd brokered a truce between the East Coast Crips and the Mexican-American Florencia 13 gang, ending a decades-long war. At the time of Wallace's 2020 arrest, he was running his own non-profit called United We Stand Up, and he also took part in anti-gang outreach programs through the organization Trucing the Gangs. Prosecutors argued that he wasn't a changed man, describing him as undeterred and unrepentant. To that end, they highlighted a 2021 incident in which Wallace had orchestrated the stabbing of a fellow inmate. Prosecutors also mentioned the kingpin boasting in YouTube videos about torturing dogs for enjoyment. The jury was presented with clips in which Wallace spoke about bonding in prison with a man nicknamed Evil because they both had countless murders under their belts. Wallace was ultimately found guilty of the racketeering conspiracy and would likely spend the rest of his life behind bars. If these cases of kingpins making terrifying decisions didn't give you the chills, then stay tuned till after number 1 for our previous release of When Extreme Paranoia Goes Wrong, coming right up. Number 1. Alexander Tamati. The kingpin of a New Zealand biker gang was jailed for 10 years in the spring of 2018 after he viciously attacked and abused a teenage girl who owed him drug money. 60-year-old Alexander Tamati was a leading figure within the Mongrel mob and the former president of its Aotearoa chapter, also known as Waldo or Cap, short for Captain. He had a criminal career spanning over 4 decades that saw him convicted for assault and drug trafficking. In November of 2016, a 19-year-old woman was unable to cover an $800 drug debt, and Tamati sent 2 of his mongrel mob henchmen to grab her so that she could work off what she owed. He then held the victim captive, tormented her, threatened her, and forced himself upon her. The teenager survived her ordeal, which Crown prosecutors would describe as degrading and dehumanizing. At the start of his trial in 2017, Tamati admitted that he'd supplied methamphetamine to the victim. He denied the other charges, including 4 charges of unlawful connection, 2 of kidnapping, aggravated assault, assault on a female, assault with a blunt instrument, and threatening to kill or do grievous bodily harm. It only took a jury 1.5 hours to find Tamati guilty of all the other offenses. Only after receiving the verdict did Tamati admit his culpability with the same degree of remorselessness he'd exhibited throughout the legal proceedings. He told a reporter, "Now, well, I did it. I actually don't know why I did it." Tamati's co-defenders, Angus Benson and Hagan Tarawaya Wiramu Henare, had brought the victim to the kingpin with the message, "Parcel delivered." Benson and Henare were also found guilty, and they were jailed for 2 years, 3 months and 2 years, 6 months, respectively. Italian-born widow Palmyra Silva was tending to her back garden in Edmonton, North London, on September the 4th of 2014 when she was suddenly attacked by a male assailant. The 82-year-old great-grandmother, who reportedly ran a local cafe, was viciously stabbed to death by her machete-wielding attacker, who then decapitated her remains. Silva's killer was swiftly identified as 25-year-old Nicholas Salvador, a paranoid schizophrenic who'd been living 3 doors down from the victim at a home belonging to his best friend's family. On the day of his violent frenzy, Salvador reportedly killed 2 of his host's cats, believing them to be demons, before breaking into a neighbor's house and attacking a car containing 2 members of his host family. Following Silva's slaying, law enforcement initiated attempts to evacuate nearby residents as the assailant continued running through gardens at the back of the terraced houses, tearing down fences as he went. Officers eventually caught up with Salvador and a violent, chaotic struggle ensued, during the course of which he was tasered 6 times before they were finally able to arrest him. The man was examined by 2 different psychiatrists at Broadmoor Hospital, both of whom supported his claims that he was insane in the legal sense at the time of the killing. Friends of Salvador revealed that in the period leading up to his rampage, he'd been exhibiting a pattern of drug and alcohol abuse, as well as a disturbing fascination with videos of beheadings. He openly admitted to murdering Silva, whom he allegedly believed to be the reincarnation of Adolf Hitler or a shape-shifting demon. Following his criminal trial at the Old Bailey, Salvador was found not guilty by reason of insanity and was detained in a psychiatric facility indefinitely. Number 6. Michelle Waller. Phoenix police responded to a home near 83rd Avenue and Camelback Road on the morning of February the 12th of 2023. A female 911 caller revealed that her roommate, identified as 44-year-old Michelle Waller, had brandished a firearm and was threatening the occupants of the house. As officers were making their way to the scene, the woman claimed to hear several gunshots from inside the home, followed by Waller getting into her car and driving away. Upon arrival, law enforcement found Waller's disabled ex-boyfriend, Michael Hill, suffering from gunshot wounds to the face and chest. He was rushed to the hospital where he later succumbed to his injuries. According to the victim's mother, she and her 2 sons had temporarily moved in with Waller and her mum back in January. They were planning to move out forthwith, but then things took a sudden turn for the worst. Though she'd been behaving erratically for days, Waller started acting paranoid on the day of the incident, reportedly yelling at her roommates about how they were attempting to take her house away from her. That was when she pulled out the weapon and started waving it about before gunning Hill down. Although she fled the scene in the immediate aftermath, Waller was eventually tracked down and arrested. She was charged with numerous offenses, including first-degree premeditated murder and aggravated assault. Her bond was set at a reported $1 million as she awaited her case's next steps. Number 5. Raphael Vargas-Olvera. A woman phoned the Glendale Police Department in Arizona to report that her brother had admitted to killing their father on the night of August the 25th of 2022. Shortly thereafter, a second 911 call was made by a man who identified himself as Raphael Vargas-Olvera. The latter claimed to have shot someone during a family gathering at a house near 69th Avenue and Bethany Home Road. 26-year-old Vargas-Olvera then reportedly locked himself in the master bedroom, but told the dispatcher that he'd entered his neighbor's property in an attempt to throw the police off his trail. After responding officers heard more gunshots from the family residence, they deployed a drone and a robot, whereupon they determined that Vargas-Olvera was still inside. The man eventually opened fire on the officers standing outside the front door, at which point he was met with return fire and fled into the backyard with a rifle. A pair of SWAT team members positioned themselves on nearby rooftops and shot Vargas-Olvera, who was then taken into custody with the aid of a K-9 unit. The suspect was brought to the hospital where he remained in critical condition for over a month before being released and booked into jail. During a sweep of the home, investigators recovered 53 shell casings and also came upon the lifeless body of Vargas-Olvera's father, 48-year-old Antonio Vargas-Granados. While being interviewed by the police, Vargas-Olvera confessed to gunning down his father because he'd become paranoid that he was armed after hearing what sounded like a round being chambered or a gun slide rack in. Although no officers were injured in the shootout, the suspect reportedly caused more than $10,000 worth of damages to police equipment. He was held in custody on a $1 million cash-only bond, facing charges of murder, aggravated assault, and attempted murder of a police officer. Number 4. Luke Mullen. On the evening of July the 6th of 2017, the police in Pueblo, Colorado received a tip that a man was exhibiting paranoid behavior and had constructed multiple homemade bombs. Authorities subsequently learned that the individual in question, identified as 34-year-old Luke Mullen, was driving to the airport in Colorado Springs to pick up his relatives. Officers caught up with him in Fountain, where they took him into custody without incident. Mullen reportedly had some of the makeshift explosives in the vehicle, which were dealt with by members of the Colorado Springs bomb squad. Another explosive device found at Mullen's residence was safely destroyed by the Pueblo Metro bomb squad. The man's wife and children were said to have been inside the home when the bomb was found. While being interviewed by law enforcement, Mullen revealed that he'd created the explosives to protect himself and his family because he thought the house had been bugged and they were being watched. His wife reportedly displayed similarly paranoid behavior and was thus taken to a local hospital for a psychological evaluation. As a consequence for possessing the homemade bombs, Mullen faced several criminal charges, including reckless endangerment. Number 3. Lucy Quail. On the morning of October the 24th of 2021, a man from the town of Leek in Staffordshire, England, looked out his window to find a strange knife-wielding woman loitering along South Bank Street. In Stoke-on-Trent Crown Court, it was detailed how the woman in question, identified as Lucy Quail, had just recently been released from prison after serving several years for striking a man over the head with a hammer and crowbar. Back in 2013, when police approached her on the street in Leek, Quail was reportedly acting paranoid and went on about how there were people in her loft who threatened her. The 43-year-old had brandished the blade, which was described as a hunting-style knife with a serrated edge, in order to protect herself from the purported intruders. Quail was taken into police custody on a charge of possession of a knife in public. Upon searching her residence, investigators didn't find any unwanted visitors, but they did recover 3 additional knives. While illustrating the extent of Quail's decline in mental health, her defense team revealed that she tried to smoke out her fictitious burglars by leaving a hand towel out in her apartment. She was officially diagnosed with a personality disorder, schizophrenia, and post-traumatic stress disorder while in custody. In March of 2023, Quail was sent back to jail for a period of 9 months. Number 2. Matthew Jones. 39-year-old William Phelan was discharged from the North Manchester General Hospital after receiving treatment for his mental health in 2017. Following his release, he was visited by community nurses to help ease him back into everyday life and assess his progress. During these visits, the health professionals took note of the fact that there was always another man present at Phelan's flat, namely 42-year-old Matthew Jones. The The pair had reportedly met during their simultaneous stay at the hospital, after which they remained close friends and even referred to one another as brother. Things seemed to be going well for Phelan until he suddenly stopped responding to messages from family members and his care coordinator in early 2018. In March, police conducted a welfare check at his Harpuri apartment, where he was found dead from multiple stab wounds. Forensic analysis of the residence indicated that Phelan had likely been dead for more than a month by the time his remains were discovered. The evidence also led investigators to the conclusion that the grisly crime had been committed by the victim's best friend, Jones. The latter allegedly used one of Phelan's own kitchen knives to fatally stab him 8 times before very nearly cutting his head clean off. Jones subsequently went to great lengths to cover up the crime by destroying all keys to the flat and putting up a sign on the front door that read, "Gone on holiday." It's believed that the murder had been the end result of Jones's ongoing battle with paranoid schizophrenia, which had only been exacerbated by drugs and alcohol. Despite his mental instability, Jones was ultimately convicted of murder, for which he was sentenced to life in prison with a minimum term of 20 years. Number 1. Natalie Marie Gonzalez. On December the 11th of 2021, the police in Kissimmee, Florida, responded to a 911 call about a violent altercation at a house on Windy Dune Court. Responding officers were met by the caller, 32-year-old Natalie Marie Gonzalez, who was holding a pair of scissors and a hammer. She refused to drop the items when asked to do so by law enforcement, prompting officers to detain her and eliminate the potential threat to their safety. Gonzalez was profusely apologetic, but insisted she did what she had to do to protect herself. Though initially confused by the woman's contrition, officers subsequently stumbled upon the bloodied remains of Gonzalez's mother, Jacqueline Negron, in the shower. Negron's body presented with visible signs of blunt force trauma, as well as multiple stab wounds. Gonzalez openly admitted to murdering the victim, but contended that it wasn't her mother after all, but a woman named Becca, who disguised herself as her mother. The suspect further claimed that this Becca character had abducted her, although those claims were unsubstantiated. Gonzalez was booked into jail on a charge of first-degree premeditated murder. Following her arrest, Gonzalez's brother publicly came out and said that the family had tried to have her psychologically examined just a week prior to the murder, but she'd ultimately gone home with her mother, whom she described as her best friend. Thanks for watching. For a month, would you rather shadow a gang leader or a police sergeant, each working in the most dangerous part of your country? Let us know in the comments section below.